What I'd like to talk to you about now is this movement toward what's known as cost volume profit analysis. And the idea here is that we are going to be moving from our traditional income statement. So if you think about our traditional income statement, we have sales, we have cost of goods sold, gross margin, operating expenses, and then we have operating income. And what I'd like to do then, in terms of moving from this is our traditional reporting, where all of the costs end up into the units of inventory that are then sold. We're going to move toward is what's known as variable costing. And so under this approach, our second line, instead of cost of goods sold, would be variable costs, and I would say and expenses, as opposed to what we would have replaced with the fourth line of operating expenses would be fixed costs and expenses. And so what we end up with here in this third line is what's known as our contribution margin. Now this is going to be an important characteristic and something you probably remember from managerial accounting. But the idea here is that we are going to want to evaluate how much costs are going to change over a certain range as we increase or decrease the number of units that are sold. And so that's a critical component of the variable costing income statement, is that this allows flexibility, at least in these top three lines, because these are numbers that will be changing, whereas the fixed costs are numbers that won't be changing. And so, as you go back into cost of goods sold from our traditional standpoint, the idea there is that we have our direct costs of direct materials and direct labor in the units of production, but then there's overhead. And there, to be fair, there are some overhead costs that may vary with production. You would have indirect materials would be a good example of that. If there's some sort of estimate of electricity, maybe more usage of that would be something that could be variable in nature. As we have more units produced and sold, there may be that those costs might increase. But costs like rent, wages of supervisors, insurance, for the most part, these are costs that are not going to be changing, and so it's very difficult to make projections of those costs as we move into trying to determine what will happen as our sales numbers will change. So that's where recasting this in terms of variable costing is going to be critically important, so that we're going to be able to make better decisions and informed decisions by comparing items that are going to be changing. So these three here, if we highlight them here, these are going to be at least anticipated changing with units, and the fixed costs and expenses are not changing with units. One more item to be putting a bow on here is that we actually will be having cost of goods sold then going into variable cost of goods sold and fixed costs, and operating expenses. Some of those are going to be moved up into the variable expenses, as well as those that would remain fixed. And so we'll continue that in the next video.